message you actually drafted it. That's nearly the only tie I never finished.
I have a consulting business that's on the phrase capital. I call multiple businesses on the same time. It's about the art. I know there's a lot of interactions. So default we work for things that fill the gaps when certain other things are.
I've been working on these entire models together, but again, technicals and things like that. So I did within my for the time being. Definitely not big out my actually right now. So looking for somebody that can take definitely obviously depending on the person who's a good fit.
Hey! That's awesome. Thank you guys for coming. You are here with Startup Denver's interactive panel, and we're going to be talking about how entrepreneurs and developers can succeed together. If you've ever asked yourself if you need a technical co-founder, you're in the right place. If you've ever asked yourself, how do I learn to talk with a developer, you're also in the right place. It's an interactive panel, so you guys can chime in at any moment. We have a couple questions to get the conversation started, and feel free to chime in. If you haven't already joined our meetup group, the link is right here. It's meetup.com/startupdenver. Give us some time, but we're filming this, and the video will be up later on this link. And thank you guys for coming. The sign-in sheet was going around. Has everyone signed in?
No.
Where is the sign-up sheet?
It's over here.
Oh, okay. So it's making its way around?
Yes.
Did everyone on this side sign in?
Yes.
No, we sign it.
Okay, so let's make sure it gets back around. Cool. So we're here with Peter with Edge Rocket and Eric with Elo. What are you guys up to nowadays?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Hey guys, my name is Peter McLaughlin. I'm the CEO of a startup called Edge Rocket, and what we do is we help companies provide great online learning resources for their employees. So it's a SaaS model product, software as a service model product, and what we do is we aggregate a lot of the open online learning resources that are out there. And so in some ways we're almost like a Kayak or Expedia for online learning rather than for online travel. And then we provide some organizational and management features for companies to use so that they can organize, track, manage, curate, assign, and otherwise manage their learning for their company, for their employees. So we started last year in 2014, early 2014. I went to a local accelerator program called the Founder Institute. I went there too in a different cohort. That was very valuable. That was at the end of 2013. Started the business after that, added a technical co-founder, a developer a few months later, and then we launched a product about 6-8 months ago. And since then, we've been working with a few contractors to get things done. We've added a handful of clients. We have a little bit of seed funding, and we're after it right now.
Cool. All right. Well, my name's Eric Allen. I'm a software developer. I work for Elo, a local social media startup. Elo, a lot of people refer to Elo as a social media company or something like that, but quite frankly, it's more of a social revolution. Elo is a public benefit corporation, and it is written into our bylaws that we will never advertise to you on our site, and we will never sell your data. We wholeheartedly believe that our customers are not a product. We are not interested in people coming to our site so that we can buy and sell them to advertisers and so that we can manipulate the way you think and feel about things. It's not what we're about. Elo is an awesome place for people to come, to share the things that they're passionate about with other people, and to consume things that they're really passionate about. And I haven't always been a developer. I went to DU, I studied finance, stats, and economics. I've worked in large finance, I've done some sales work, I've also started 3 companies, and I have transacted 1. And so I have a little bit of experience on the startup side of things, but moved over to the development side of things when I had a lot of issues scaling one of my companies and just kind of got super frustrated. So I really enjoy being a developer. I've had a blast working with Elo. It is a phenomenal group of people to work with. If you haven't checked out our site, you definitely should. And if you guys have any other questions, let me know.
Great. So if people here with the computers open, or if we want to write down your URLs, maybe you guys could each tell everyone where to find you guys online.
Yeah, EdgeRocket is just like it sounds, edgerocket.co. Co is in Colorado versus .com.
And LO is the same. It's LOELLO.co.
Great. So I think the first question that we can get started with is tell us a little bit more about who you work with on a daily basis and what their roles are and how you guys interact. And let's, for the questions, let's start with Peter and then go to Eric.
Sounds good. So I work with my co-founder, Alexei Dmitriev. He's the CTO, essentially. So he's a software engineer. He's been a software engineer and the leader of software engineering teams for a couple decades now. Then we also work with a variety of contractors. So we've worked with contractors on the business side for some sales and some marketing. For example, an inside salesperson who basically was an appointment setter to set up appointments for me to go sell to. And then on the product development side, Alexei, we've worked with some UX, UI individuals. We've also worked with some other developers. For a little while, we worked at, I think probably people here are familiar with Galvanize. We worked with a team of interns from Galvanize. Galvanize has what they call G School. It's Ruby on Rails training for 6 months or so. We worked with some of those student interns on the EdgeRocket product. So for a while, we housed ourselves in Galvanize and had pretty frequent interaction with that small team of interns at Galvanize. And that was mainly Alexei, the CTO, rather than me. But that was what we called home. That was our co-working space for a while.
Yeah, so right now, LO's development team is about 10 people strong. We have a director of product, and then we also have a director of engineering, a VP of engineering. And so basically, my day, every day starts with stand-up. We have stand-up at 10 a.m. And we basically go through what did I do yesterday, what am I going to do today, and am I blocked on anything specific. We also break down into smaller feature teams that work specifically on any given feature, and those smaller teams will meet with the product team. So we have our two co-founders, Todd and Lucian, who are based out of Burger 4, a design agency in Boulder. And so we'll get together, we'll have what we call mini design sprints, and we will sort of hash out what a feature is going to look like. And we've been working really hard recently to scale our features down so that we can, with just a pair of developers, with 2 developers, we can release any given feature, MVP that feature in exactly 1 week, so that we can get our iteration cycles much smaller and roll out features much quicker and get that feedback that we need to make them better. So yeah, that's what I work on.
Cool. So just curious, who here has indeed heard of Galvanize? Okay. And who here has a startup? Who here works for a startup? Cool. Any questions at this point?
So I got one.
Yeah.
So Elo, I'm familiar with the site. Without generating advertising revenue or selling data, how do you guys plan to monetize the site?
There are a number of different ways that Elo could be monetized. It's definitely not our focus right now. We are focusing on developing the best product that we possibly can. We want to develop a place that people want to come. Elo has been described multiple times as the most overwhelmingly positive social network out there. People love interacting, and it's again it's like we want to create something that's super authentic. There are some things that will be coming down the road, things that I'm not at liberty to talk about, but I think as most entrepreneurs in this room can understand, there are a lot of models that are freemium models that will eventually be monetized in some way. And what I can say is that at Elo, you can always rest assured that your personal data will never be sold to anyone else, and you'll never be advertised to on our site. We even go so far as to put content behind toggles on the screen. So we allow people to post, to embed things from SoundCloud or Vimeo or YouTube, and we don't necessarily have control over whether or not a YouTube video has an advertisement in it. So what we do is we allow you within your settings to say, hey, I don't want to view anything at all that could even possibly have advertising in it. And when that happens, those posts are just hidden behind the toggle. So we take our manifesto and we take our our ideals very seriously, and in terms of monetization, you know, I would imagine that down the road we'll probably roll out some features that people can pay for, or there'll be some other things going on. But right now, that's definitely not our number one priority. Our number one priority is building the best product that we can possibly build that makes people want to continue to use it.
In the back?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how you do your research for, you know, what do you want to do next? And then do you have a methodology to go to market or to develop the code, test it, and like that?
You go ahead and start.
Yeah, I guess I'd say, I mean, in terms of how we got started, you know, we're pretty much like most people these days, you know, think hard about customer development and lean startup methodologies. And so we followed a lot of that, maybe not to the T, and we didn't have our, what do you call those, business canvas maps against the wall. We did to start with, after we started interacting, we did a ton of customer interviews with, you know, two phases. One kind of who we consider to be the end user of the EdRocket product, and another the economic buyer, or typically for us this would be either an executive team member or an HR director at a company. So we did a number of interviews as well, and then we did put together what you might call an MVP or a prototype, and try to get as much feedback on that in an iterative fashion. So in general, we followed a lot of those tenets and principles, and I think it served us well. I mean, candidly, we're not growing as quickly as we want to right now, and so should we have done more of that or different? Maybe, but that's how we got started, at least. Right now, we still are keen on getting as much feedback as possible with our current clients. We consistently talk to, I mean, both our, again, the people I interact with the most are the people who make decisions about should we buy this for our company and provide this to our company, but then also always is critical to talk to the people who are actually going to use it the most. In this case, just, you know, individual contributor employees and managers who manage teams who may use EdRocket to be assigning out courses or other information that's useful. So from, I don't know, in terms of the code, maybe I'll let Eric talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I actually have only been with Elo for a couple of months. I actually joined their team as a contractor on December 1st, and then they ended up making me an offer to join their team full time. I was a contractor at a company called ThoughtBot, which is an extremely well-known startup consultancy, and I think what makes ThoughtBot most valuable, aside from the fact that they employ some of the most talented programmers in the world, it's that their process that they have iterated on since they opened their doors over 13 years ago, and is also well documented, which you guys can all read for free. If you just Google ThoughtBot, which is, you know, ThoughtBot and then the word playbook, it's free. It's available online. You can read it. It's a dense read. It'll probably take you an hour, and it's worth every bit of your time. If you own a startup, or if you're thinking about starting something and you haven't read this, like, it's the first thing you should do tonight, because and at Elo, we're actually continually iterating on our own process. I mean, Elo is a company that was only officially founded, I believe, back in October, and so it's still an extremely young company, and they've brought in a lot of different minds from a lot of different places, and people have very strong opinions about whether or not we should be using Agile or Kanban or Waterfall or whatever. And there's all these different buzzwords. I don't really care about the buzzwords, to be honest with you. What I learned at ThoughtBot is that before you write a single line of code, what you should do is you should lock yourself in a room. We usually did it with our clients for a week, and we would say, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What are all the assumptions that you have about the problem that you're trying to solve? And we'd go through all these different exercises, all of which are documented in the book that you can read about. But essentially, it's like we have a period of the week that we call diverge, and then we have one that's called converge, and it's essentially saying, like, let's throw every single idea at the wall that we can possibly come up with to solve this problem. Let's look at every single assumption that we can possibly come up with. Let's analyze those assumptions and let's vet those assumptions and figure out which ones are actually true and which ones are false. And then by the end of the week, we have an idea of what we're going to build in terms of a clickable prototype. So we actually would build a prototype that's clickable, and we would bring in users, and we would do user testing with something that looks like an actual application. before we ever wrote a single line of code. And we would record with video their facial expressions and their click points and everything. And what we would do is, by doing so, you can very, very reliably find out whether or not the thing that you're building is actually valuable. And if it wasn't valuable, we wouldn't build it. And if it was, we would already have our MVP sort of defined at that point, and then that's what we would stick within, and we would start writing feature stories based on that, and then you start, like, you literally one by one start picking off feature stories and developing those stories. Anybody who is writing code prior to doing user testing of any kind is probably wasting a lot of money. Because if you're not doing these types of things, you're basically wishing on a star. It's like saying, like, I hope this feature works, or I hope this is valuable. Unless you got really deep pockets, that's going to be very expensive.
So it sounds like you're working in person a lot of the time with your team, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and at ThoughtBot, that whole first week design sprint was required to be in person. And then we would, even if it was remote, we would, like, as part of the daily stand-up, the product owner, which in my case at Elo is like, you know, the director of product. But at any company, if a startup hired us, whether it's their CEO or their CEO or like whoever, like, they were part of our stand-up every single day. It's a very intense process, and it's a very iterative process. We would literally iterate every single day, and then once a week we would have what we call a retro, in order to figure out, like, hey, what is the client not getting from us that they feel like they're needing? Where are the communication breakdowns? What are we not getting from them? Are they going online every night and approving the stories that we're writing on our staging server? So, like, every single step of the way. If you're paying somebody to develop something for you and you're not seeing the progress on a daily basis, and you're not being able to go and verify that progress, there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. So and being in person just makes that so much easier. Because the question that I'd ask as an entrepreneur, and you know, sometimes being able to be in person with a developer and not, is how important is that in-person interaction? It sounds like on your team it's pretty darn important.
I mean, I know that at Elo and also at ThoughtBot, that, like, being in the office and being able to ask questions of other people and have those interactions, and you know, even at ThoughtBot, we would use Slack every day. So it was required of our product owner or the client that we were working with to be on Slack and be available at all times during normal business hours to answer questions. So even if they're not in the office, like, they need to be available. They need to be available to us. So I would say it's more valuable, like, if you're working with other developers, to be in the office. If there was a product owner who was, like, literally just sitting next to me 24/7 as I'm coding, it probably wouldn't be super productive for either one of us. Mm-hmm. But I think there needs to be a balance there.
Okay, interesting. And Peter, what would your answer be on how important it is to work together with your technical co-founders?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are thousands of companies out there, and so there are thousands of different ways to get this done and different ways to be successful. With us, I mean, I thought it was very useful when we had a free co-working space at Galvanize. That was, I think, most productive. We used a lot of the same tools. We used Trello as a Kanban board. They used a tool called Pivotal Tracker. We used Slack. And again, I was a little bit more peripheral. I would approve all these features as they got created and delivered by Alexi and the product developers of the Galvanize team. So that was good. You know, there have been other times, though, over the year and a half that we've worked, where, I mean, right now, I'm working from my home office. Alexi's working from his home office. We meet at least 2 times a week. A lot of times we have meetings with other people for a variety of reasons, and we'll, you know, get together before or after that meeting. We also have a Monday, you know, just a Google Hangout that Alexi and I do to clarify what we're going to do for that week, and specifically what product development is going to happen that week. So there's a lot of that, but I mean, even I'll talk for Alexi for 1 second here. He didn't like being at Galvanize that much. He doesn't like, I mean, at his home office, developers, they've got about 10 screens going at any given time, monitors. They've got a lot of other things that they like to set up their environment. And he didn't think that some co-working facilities, Galvanize and others, really suited him that well. So if and when we add additional employees, I'm pretty sure that we'll get a small office, maybe at a co-working space, maybe just another specific office. But for right now, this is being lean and being careful with the funds that we have, and the best way for us to go right now.
Yeah, ThoughtBot was actually based out of Galvanize when I first joined them, and then they got their own office last year. And I can also say that as a developer, being there is extremely distracting. It's not the best place for a developer to be, in my opinion. I mean, some people do okay there. I definitely would not. Even at Elo, I go into the office every morning at 7 a.m. because that means I have at least 2 hours a morning before anyone else usually shows up to really have some quiet time and get my day together. You know, developers like to work on their own schedule typically, and that works great for some startups if you only have one developer or two, but when you start to try to build a team of 10 or 12 people, it's really important, in my opinion, for everybody to be in the same room. I think there's a lot of developers who would disagree, simply because they don't like, like you said, like they'd like to be in their own little world. But also, I would say that, like, you know, doing things like pair programming and stuff is also sort of a newer thing. Like, people haven't been doing it for that long, and a lot of really old school developers just don't like it at all. So, so yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I see a lot of the G schoolers over at Galvanize, and it seems like a lot of effort they're putting up for even just one screen in that area. Questions from you guys?
I've done a lot of work with software development projects, and one of the biggest challenges seems to be for the business person to really understand what's going on in the black box of the development team. And how do you go about learning enough but not learning too much in order to make the decisions that you need to make from a business standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's no easy answer. I think that, I mean, partly, I've worked for 3 or 4 technology companies now. I've never been a developer. I'm not a coder or programmer, but I've known our products, you know, quite extensively. I've done training and consulting around the software products in the various companies that I've worked for. And so, I mean, I've worked with development teams. I've had a product management role before, and that is actually very valuable too, to have a little bit of project management experience, product management experience. That definitely helps you just know where you can add value and where you can't. But I mean, one thing that I do is just ask a lot of questions. I mean, this is, you know, the Edge Rocket is created on Ruby on Rails, and we deploy it on Heroku, and you know, the code is usually stored on GitHub. And Alexi, my co-founder, has educated me about a lot of these things, because it's different from the companies where I was at before. It was much larger scale, complex enterprise software, so pretty different. And I didn't have to get that close to the code. So in terms of like making decisions, I mean, Alexi's pretty sharp as well from a business point of view. So we'll talk about, I mean, from the very beginning, we're making some decisions about, okay, we know we drew up some wireframes, we have clickable prototypes, we're getting feedback, and the question was, I mean, Alexi knew a number of different languages and frameworks, and so he was thinking hard about what's going to be best to deploy. You know, frankly, I look to him for most of those decisions. I know a number of more like the hacker business CEO or co-founder, and some of those guys have taught themselves how to code, and usually it's more like a short-term goal, learn how to hack together some kind of prototype so you can get some traction, and then get real software engineers with real experience to build it and scale it and things like that, and then you go and do more business-ish stuff, sales and marketing and other things like that. But that doesn't work for everyone, and you gotta look at the opportunity cost. I mean, if you're a brilliant sales or marketer or customer success or some other role, do you really want to take 6 months to a year to multiple years to learn how to hack together a prototype? And again, that's going to depend on, I mean, it's easier and easier now than ever, and you can do a bunch of cool online courses and learn a lot of things. And again, I've read a lot of blog posts from business guys who learned how to code like you did, Eric, and they love it, and they said that was an extremely valuable thing for them to do. But again, in terms of making some decisions, I mean, look at that opportunity cost if you want to go that way. And then more generally, I mean, I've looked at Alexi to make a lot of those decisions. He keeps, I think he's good at informing me about a lot of the potential pros and cons, what we might face later versus what the advantages are now. And based on that, we'll just end up making decisions. But if you can be, I think it makes a big difference if you can just be a little bit more credible than, you know, a clueless, you know, business sales guy. I mean, if you can share, be more conversant with some of the decisions that are being made, and especially if you're going to be interviewing other people to be potentially on your team. Don't try to be a developer if you're not one. I think that's the stupidest thing. But if you know at least a little bit, and if you can contribute more, if you can draw wireframes, if you can know what the basic infrastructure that you guys are dealing with, I think that all helps. And again, I just think that the team, especially if you're going to add people in the future, it gives you a little bit more credibility, and it's just more efficient if you don't have to, be a totally clueless founder.
Other questions?
I got one.
Nick?
So kind of backing up from, if you're an early stage startup, what advice would you guys give as far as finding that CTO or finding that technical co-founder with you? Because I think from my side, being a marketer or business side person, I can speak the language, I understand kind of what's going on, but it's like, well, do we build on Ruby on Rails or do we build on something else? I think where does that conversation kind of start to find out your match or your kind of technical side of things?
Yeah, I'll continue on if that's okay. I mean, when I found the CTO, it ended up that, I think I mentioned I went through this Founder Institute program, which was quite valuable. Alexi was in that program, and so that's where I got to meet him. We didn't join up together during that program, actually, and it was even a few months later. He was considering a few other things on his side. I was talking with other people as well, and then we eventually kind of ended up getting back together and deciding to join forces. What I did in the interim there is, first of all, earn your technical co-founder. I mean, the last thing, software developers want is some kind of, blabbing sales guy who says, I got this great idea and all we need to build it and we're going to make millions and billions, and it isn't really contributing much. That's who you don't want to be for sure. And so to the extent where, again, you can make a decision about, you try to learn some coding or front-end development or some parts of it, but even some product management, some basics about putting UX and about wireframing and about getting very clear and specific about what you want, and doing customer development too, which is time intensive and is not, it's not hard, but it takes a lot of time to go and get real feedback and identify a problem in a very focused, specific way that's worth solving, do the research for the market behind it and all that. So I'm sure you're going to do a lot of that. But the other things that I did specifically is I did go to a lot of meetups. I joined things like Co-Founders Lab. I don't know if you're familiar with that site. There's a meetup that goes along with the site. I found I did have a number of conversations based on relationships that came out of that were semi-productive. Nothing ended up happening, but with one or two, we had some productive conversations, and maybe things worked out differently. One of those guys would have been a co-founder. Other things that I did, just in general, networking and making sure that the people are out there looking, can talk about your company and you, and set you up with potentially good developers. That's a good thing to do. There are a lot of development shops out there. We used Galvanize G School. They wouldn't have used us if we didn't have Alexi, because they wanted a proficient, technical developer on the team already. But there are a lot of schools, a lot of coding schools, a lot of development boot camps out there these days, and you can potentially go and meet people there. That's definitely a viable way to go. And then, again, you can, using LinkedIn and other just social networking tools, you can do basic searches and find a bunch of people who, around Denver, who are in companies that you might admire and who may be working in a framework that you want to work in. Those are all things that I did. Again, none of them, it ended up being someone that I knew because we'd gone through the program together, who we ended up joining up with. But all those, there were some, it was tough. It was a few months where I didn't have a technical co-founder. I was trying to make as much progress as possible to continue to have as good of a story to tell as possible. But it's not easy. And these days, as everyone knows, the market for software developers is very tight. It's easy for those guys to get a lot of job offers, and for them to come and work for you, maybe for free to start, on your potentially great idea. It's tough. It's tough.
Anything to add, Eric?
Yeah, I would just say that I think the fastest road to finding a technical co-founder is to think more about what you can bring to the table rather than what you can get from somebody else. In terms of like I hear literally 100 pitches a week. Everybody and their brother wants to tell me about the next greatest idea, and we're going to be billionaires. And frankly, most of the ideas are not very good. They're not vetted. They haven't done their research. They have no data to back up any of their assumptions. Nothing. And it's just sort of a waste of my time when I hear that stuff. And honestly, I don't say that to be rude. I just say it because you know, if you are at the point where you feel like you're seeking out a technical co-founder, you should really have done your homework already and not sort of like make a fool out of yourself at those meetups. And I think a lot of those meetups are probably really valuable. I think finding somebody, like for a lot of these prototypes that I hear about, frankly, they're simple enough to where somebody from like a touring school, after having been there for 7 months, they may not be able to build it perfectly, but they're going to be able to build it well enough to where you have something to show somebody that might get you some funding. The biggest thing I would say is that if you're going to go to these meetups and you're going to go and you've already educated yourself, find somebody who's really passionate about your idea. Like, I'd worry far less about what their skill set is and what language they're going to write it in or whatever, and I'd worry way more about how passionate they are about that thing because, I mean, like you said, I mean, the opportunities that we have, like the developers have to do sort of like what they want to do. I left the most sweetheart gig on the planet at ThoughtBot to work for Elo because I really, really believe in what they're trying to accomplish. I believe in their idea, and above all, it was a huge opportunity for me to learn things that I might never get to learn at another company. Like trying to scale from like 0 to a couple of million users in literally months' time, sharding databases, having to work, like the kinds of problems and the things you have to think about on a daily basis to deal with that much traffic every day are so different than building a basic Ruby on Rails app that's like, I rebuilt a shopping cart, you know? It's like, it's just not the same. So finding people that are really passionate about what you're passionate about, I mean, honestly, like that's the Elo story, just so you guys are familiar. Like, Paul Budnitz started Kid Robot, and he started Budnitz Bicycles, and he sold Kid Robot a number of years back. And he had worked with Todd and Lucian, who are the founders of Burger 4, a design agency in Boulder. And they had worked together a little bit on Kid Robot stuff, they worked together on Budnitz Bicycle stuff, but they just were sitting around one day talking about how miserable it was to use Facebook and how there's just no alternatives out there and there's nothing that's genuine, there's nothing that's not just trying to like literally buy and sell human data. And Paul's crazy enough to believe that he could fix that. And you know, so they went out and they pitched a bunch, they couldn't get any funding, it was it had zero traction. So Todd and Lucian reached out to some of their buddies who happen to run a consultancy here in town called ModeSet. And a few of the guys from ModeSet were like, you know what, I think this is a pretty rad idea. Like, and they also had a relationship with these guys ahead of time. So it wasn't like it was just some stranger being like, hey, will you build this for free, for equity? They really knew these people, and they were like, they believed in them, and they believed in Paul because Paul had already been successful. And they knew his pedigree. They knew that he was just a tireless workhorse. And they were like, it wasn't even so much that they were investing in the ideas, they were investing in Paul and saying like, we believe that this is going to be successful. And it was probably almost a year or a year and a half from the day that they started like spending their nights and weekends before they got their first bit of funding. You know, they built this prototype over the course of you know, over their nights and weekends, and that's how it got started. And now we've raised almost, I think, 11 million or something like that. We've done two rounds of funds. But yeah, so you know, that's the whole reason Elo exists is because they were talking with people that were really passionate about what they were passionate about. And I can't, I mean, yeah, like I said, I never in a million years thought I would leave ThoughtBot. Like, it was such an awesome company to work for. Their #1 priority is learning and helping their developers become the best version of themselves that they can become. And they build, without question, they write some of the best software in the world. Like, they write really quality software. And it was my first job as a software developer. So you can imagine, like, what a gift that was. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, like, you know, I really agonized over that decision, but I don't regret it for a second. And I love ThoughtBot as a company. I highly recommend them. But the team at Elo is, I mean, it's literally, I mean, it's a team of geniuses. Like, it's all people. And honestly, like, the level of give a shit is so high that I'm not joking. Like, I can't wait to get to work every day at 7 a.m. because I get to work with people who are just as excited about my idea as they are. And it was funny, we were having a conversation right before this, and I said, the sexiest thing I could ever find in a co-founder is work ethic. Because I've had a really bad experience in the past with a co-founder who really thought it would be cool to be part of a startup and was even willing to put some money in. But at the end of the day, like, wouldn't show up and didn't actually want to work. And that's the worst thing you can find.
So I have another topic I kind of wanted to ask you guys about. It's outsourcing work. You know, obviously when you're starting a company, you don't have, unless you already gotten that funding, you usually start out without any. And it's maybe tempting to go outsource work to developers that might be willing to take less. What's each of you guys' opinions on that?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and we have not chosen to do that with EdgeRocket. We've talked to various groups because as we've needed to make more progress more quickly. I mean, I think it's exciting that it's a global world and you can potentially use resources from other parts of, I mean, either U.S. or if you're talking about offshore, you could potentially pay less money and get quality work done. But it's really complex and it's really tough. So we haven't chosen to do that ourselves yet. I should say we've worked with one UI guy who is in Eastern Europe. So to some extent we have. This guy has done some limited stuff and it's worked out quite well. And we paid him $30 or $35 an hour, whereas here I think it'd be double that. So we've had a limited, some UI guy who helped us on a couple different projects and it's been successful. I've used Elance before and Nodesk and maybe you guys have before. I've gotten logos created and things like that, simple things. That's worked fine. But to actually take a big chunk or the main part of your product and have someone else create that, I'll just, I'll share two quick stories. One woman I know has a startup and she did have an offshore team from India and they did hack together a prototype that looked pretty good and then helped her get some progress and momentum. And then it came to a point where she needed a lot more stuff done and there were so many problems with the code and so many botched communications that she basically just had to start all over. And so I wouldn't even necessarily say that was a disaster because she got some of the things that she wanted and needed. And sometimes that's the way people will start. If you're starting a tech startup and you need some kind of prototype built, I mean, if you've done, ideally you can do some other creative things that don't involve actually building a product. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to validate a market and validate a problem and validate people's ability to or willingness to pay you for a particular product or solution. So do all that stuff first, but if you're in a position where you need to, that might be an answer for you. I know other people where they've tried it and it's been a problem, it's been a disaster. But one other quick story, and this is no one I know, but you guys may have known there's a cool company called Groove, I think GrooveHQ.com. It's just like customer support software, but the reason it's interesting is because this guy's blogging very transparently about their startup growth. So they started a couple years ago, I think, and the blog is called something like Our Journey to $500,000 in monthly recurring revenue is the main point of his blog, and he's just blogging all the way as they get there, including a lot of his financials, which are interesting. Anyway, the reason I mention this guy is because he did have a successful exit before. He had a bank account with a few $100K. He paid $300,000, he wrote in one of his blogs, to an agency. It was nearby, I think they're in Rhode Island, and the agency built his first product. That enabled him to attract more team, attract more investors, attract initial clients, and from there they've successfully leveraged that, and they seem to be growing quite profitably or quite handsomely, quite impressively. So he took that big risk. He spent a lot of his own money because he didn't find a technical co-founder who ended up working for him. So I mean, there are certainly success stories out there where you can either hire someone in your town, an agency, tends to be very, very expensive. I mean, again, this guy's example was $300K. There are others, I know there are success stories where people, if you're really good about managing offshore development teams, and maybe you've done it before a few times in your career, then maybe that's a good route for you. But if you haven't done it before, man, I think that it's very precarious. I think that there's a lot of things that can go wrong and probably will go wrong. So you better be ready for this.
Yeah, I mean, I have yet to meet anybody who has started a product offshore that was successful or that didn't. I mean, I met with somebody about a month and a half ago, somebody local here, who he's over 200K deep over the course of the last 18 months and basically doesn't even know if it's going to work or not. I mean, that's a travesty, if you ask me. I mean, I definitely think that, like, if I was gonna outsource my software to a team and I was in anybody's shoes, the first person I would hire is a consultant stateside, and it was their job. Like if you needed to hire a team of 10 developers and that's what you wanted, but you couldn't afford 10, maybe you hire 5 offshore people and then hire 1 person and just sit there and manage those people. Because if you don't have any technical know-how and you don't actually know what they're writing, and you can't even look at their code on a daily basis to see what they're doing, and you don't understand it, essentially I've yet to meet anybody, and don't, you're gonna have to rewrite whatever you do over again anyway. If you hire the top consultancy in the world to write your product, and it's really successful, you're gonna have to rewrite it again in like a year from now, and that's a good problem to have. The one thing I will say is that there were multiple startups that I worked with at ThoughtBot that, it was baked into the plan that around the 6, 8, 12-week period of time, for us to start helping them find a developer to come in and actually work with us on a daily basis for the last month of the project, so that we could roll off and they could roll on. And one of the biggest bargaining chips you're going to have if you're looking to hire somebody who's a full-time, if you've gotten to the point where you have enough funding to hire a full-time developer, having a code base that somebody actually wants to work on is a really huge benefit. Something that's well tested, something that they know isn't going to fall over, something that's easy to work with and that's easy to change. Because the last thing that any developer I know wants to do is to rescue somebody else's project. If they come in, and honestly, it's pretty prevalent in the development industry, and I kind of hate to say this, but there's a lot of developers that'll tell you that they can save your project, and they'll work for you for 8 months, and they'll charge you a boatload, and then they'll bail, and they'll go somewhere else, and they might leave your code in a worse situation than it was in to begin with. So as you're looking for people as well, really vet their experience and make sure that you're hiring somebody that genuinely wants to work on a startup, and not somebody who's just in between gigs, because that happens a lot, and it really all boils down to opportunity cost. If you build something by outsourcing it, there's a good chance it's going to have a ton of bugs. It's not going to work properly. It might be enough of a prototype, and it might be polished enough to convince an investor to give you some more money, but then you just got to start over. So it's a difficult problem to solve. It really is. Honestly, the best case scenario I could really think for anybody in the early startup stage shoes is to do it like Elo did it, or somebody meet somebody at the Founders Institute and build a relationship with them, and then let be interested together about the idea, because it's really difficult. Unless you have money that you've raised from family or friends, it's really difficult to go and be able to afford to build it the first time.
Well, before we make some conclusions, other questions from the audience?
Yeah. So the startup that I'm doing, what I do is client-based, one-on-one stuff. I'm not really looking to expand, on the web or anything like that, but I am looking to develop interactive software, where I'm working with a client one-on-one. It's an interactive thing that they can interact with, I interact with. My capital is zero. Where I'm at right now, starting with things. What kind of steps do I need to take to make sure that I'm making the efforts to get that software in a time frame that I'd like to, so I can start developing it and getting it going? Because I know an idea what I want, but obviously I don't have that technical knowledge or skill to apply my thoughts of it into an actual product.
Right. So do you have clients right now?
Yes.
And they're paying you for your service?
Yes. And what I do, the software would be great. It would make what I do that much more efficient, that much more applicable to other situations. But everything that I do, I kind of just stuff that I've developed myself. A lot of hard copy stuff that I work with my clients and stuff with. So definitely software is something that I'd like to get at some point as soon as possible.
Yeah. I guess one other question I'd have is, are you trying to build something that's going to be big and investable and scalable to take over the world? Or is this more is it okay if you're going to grow slowly and steadily and hopefully profitably over time? And what's the scope of what's the scale of what you want to do?
I think it has both, where maybe personally to where I'm just taking it incrementally slowly,
right.
But I also think it also has the potential to be offered to universities or things like that, kind of the broader spectrum of bigger groups and more people to get involved with it.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, the first thing I'd mention real quick is just first, if you're actually solving a real problem for people and getting paid for it, that's good. That's a good step one that frankly a lot of people never even get to. So that's a good place to start. I mean, in terms of like turning what you're doing on what you have is a service of some sort, and if you want to somehow productize that at some point, and maybe it becomes it's hybrid for a while, maybe eventually there's a product version of it that people can go use themselves or with a little bit of help. Maybe there's still other clients who need a lot of your help, but also the software helps make it easier. So I mean, lots of different ways to get there. But I mean, to start by I mean, I would try to work with some technical guy sooner rather than later. But what you're doing at least is getting you are the good things. If you can continue to add clients and continue to be successful with that, and if you can identify more specifically as possible, what is it about their problems that you're solving that can be automated? I mean, what are the parts that it could be more easily automated? And get, again, be precise and specific about these things and put it together in like, how would you envision the software looking? And then ideally, as soon as you can, begin to share those ideas and get feedback from developers, from someone who might say, well, given this client and this persona and this problem and what you're doing for them, here are some things that we could begin to automate. I mean, that certainly could be a good place to start. And it doesn't, I mean, again, you can ask yourself, do you want to build something big all of a sudden, or is it okay to just incrementally build over time? Both ways can work, I think, in different scenarios. But certainly, if there's not, if you don't think of this as hugely fundable right now, and you don't want to build a massive team in the next 2 months or something, maybe just a good, slow, steady progression upwards, where you're slowly putting together some. I mean, you're still solving problems and getting clients, and you're starting to automate a few of the low-hanging fruit. That could be a good way to go.
And even if it's not something to where maybe it's 2 years down the road where I get this software developed.
Yeah.
Maybe still working with developers to kind of, like you said, incrementally work towards that end goal.
The first piece of software that I ever wrote from start to finish was an application called the SWATbot, and it stood for Scholars Working Overtime Bot. And essentially what it was a woman that I know who actually teaches at Turing here now came to Dev Boot Camp in Chicago, and she was just one of my classmates. And she's a school teacher. She taught, essentially, she had started like this charter school in Las Vegas, and they were able to take kids that were like 3 to 4 grade levels behind in reading and math and like pretty much everything. And most of these were ESL students, and like this is the poorest school district in the country. And they were able to take all these kids, and within a year, they were at the top of their class, not just in like their state, but in the country for all their test scores and everything. And the way that they were able to do it was by tabulating data about these kids every single day with every single class. So every single teacher every day had a clipboard in their class, and they were keeping track of positive behaviors and negative behaviors and their attendance and all these other things. And the only reason that Rachel even went to Dev Boot Camp was because she had what you're doing basically, like whatever it is that you're doing, she was doing that, and she was like, I need to automate this. Like I need to make this so that I don't have to spend 16 hours every Thursday night collectively with my other teachers tabulating all this data so that on Friday we can deliver a weekly report card.
Right.
So she came to Dev Boot Camp, and we built this product with 4 completely novice developers in a week, in 8 days. And then it literally launched the next week, and they were using it in the school every day. And I would actually encourage you to go after this a lot sooner than later, primarily because the number one, most unintended consequence of this entire process is that it made the teachers a lot better at their jobs. And the reason it made the teachers better at their jobs, and this is something like, I ended up interviewing all the teachers and doing like this small documentary thing about it to raise some money in Indiegogo to build a computer lab for these kids, because Rachel decided that, why should these kids not be able to code? So she went back to school and started teaching them. But anyway, as I was interviewing these teachers and stuff, one of the teachers said flat out, he goes, I thought this was going to be a great tool for the students because they can see where their grades are at any given time. Parents could text message into the system with a cell phone and be like, why is my kid in detention today? Or how is my kid doing? They could get literally a report card of their kid in real time all the time. And the teachers were like, all those things are great byproducts of the software, but when I look at my iPad, we optimized it for iPads, and it was a web-based app. Because when I look at my iPad halfway through the class and I see that I haven't given a specific student any feedback, positive